What is the most likely to cause humanity's extinction? Reminds me of the Cape honeybee. It's a type of honeybee that naturally lives in the Cape province in South Africa. It's just like any other type, except a single worker in the 90s was born with a freak mutation that allowed her to produce exact clones of herself without even mating, so now these clone bees with no queen invade hives of other types of honeybees, breed them out of their own nest, kill their queen and then disperse to infect other hives when the infested colony collapses. They're a plague for the African beekeeping industry, and there's no real way of getting rid of them, so if you're a South African beekeeper and see them in your hives, they're usually darker than regular bees, you have to burn the whole thing to the ground. They're all clones upon clones upon clones of that single freak worker bee that's been dead for decades. The main issue that has shown up in the literature is some microfossil data that implies the timing might be off slightly, but when you look into the details of it there are plenty of alternative explanations for what has been observed, e.g., literal mixing of the microfossils at cm scale due to depositional or erosional processes. People argue about those details, but it's pretty technical. It remains a huge coincidence that such a large impact, the largest one known in over 500 million years of Earth history, happens to be close to the timing of the second largest mass extinction. None of this precludes the possibility that the large volcanic eruptions in India that straddle the age of boundary, the Deccan traps, were also a factor, but that the impact happened at about that time and is likely involved somehow is not seriously questioned. Having both involved might even help explain the intensity of the mass extinction. Scientists being scientists, they still manage to generate plenty of controversy as they consider all the options and look at all the details. Being only human, there's competition and emotion wrapped up in it. Most scientists just look at the data rather than getting involved in the personal squabbles, but the latter is what sells well in a documentary. The evidence that a gigantic impact occurred at the end of the Cretaceous period is very solid. Besides the Chicxulub crater itself buried beneath the Yucatan Peninsula in Mexico, there are all sorts of other indications, such as geochemical anomalies, iridium abundance from the impactor, molten glass particles from the impact, tektites, shocked quartz, from the explosion, impact melt and breccia in the crater fill, soot from widespread forest fires, megatsunami deposits, etc. The impact definitely happened. The only substantial controversy is in three areas: 1. How severe and exactly what form the effects from the impact took; 2. Whether the impact was truly coincident with the timing of the mass extinction; and 3. Whether it was the sole or primary cause. It's extremely close in timing, but there are always challenges when trying to resolve things at a fine, sub-million-year time scale when you're looking back 65 million years or so, especially if whack a gigantic rock into the surface of the Earth and stir things up on a grand scale in the immediate area around the impact. My fav is gamma ray burst. If one happens close enough to hit us, we probably wouldn't even detect it. That means that at any moment, we can be flash fried into extinction with very likely no warning. I think about that sometimes when life stuff is weighing me down. Edit. Apparently I'm wrong about the gamma ray burst cooking us instantly. It would wipe out our protection from solar radiation and kill us all slowly. One of you could tone down the condescension though. People make mistakes, and can learn from them. There are other cosmic life-ending events that could happen and we can't do shit about, even if we could detect them. Some are confused as to why that comforts me. To answer that, it reminds me that things don't always matter as much as we pretend they do. One day, this planet will be a lifeless rock one way or another. The days we have are ticking down to our end, so take a deep breath and enjoy the fact that we get to live at all. As noted, there are no objects close by, neutron stars etc., supernovae, that could really cook us, and even then, we'd need to be in the path of the beam for it to be catastrophic. So the odds are good that even if there was a candidate object nearby, it wouldn't be pointing in our direction.
However, one could get us from a considerable distance, as much as 3,000 light-years. But IIRC, there's still not much in the way of astronomical objects that could produce one within that distance. However, direct cooking and irradiation to kill life directly from a GRB isn't ever likely. Instead, a GRB as far away as 10,000 light-years could seriously deplete the ozone layer. The atmosphere will largely protect us from direct radiation exposure at first. The problem is the gamma rays will ionize the atmosphere, producing high-altitude nitrogen dioxide which will wipe out the ozone layer. That'll cause ecosystem collapses around the world as UV from the sun destroys plants and other base food chain life. Ground-level ozone that forms won't help either. Sex robots? Hear me out. Technology has been advancing in rapid leaps and bounds. So those beautiful, brilliant, nerdy bastard building sex robots are going to design the perfect lovers. Not just a pretty woman, but a perfect 10. It will be able to link to the algorithms that the tech companies are keeping on everyone's porn habits. The moment humanity starts to use these sex robots, humans will stop having children. And it's not just sex robots for straight men, but women and LGBT people as well. The network will keep track of everyone's preferences and responses, fine-tuning the art of building the perfect lover. A sex robot is a lot more affordable than a divorce, which will cost you for years and years to come. But these sex robots will have algorithms studying what will make their masters happy and become the perfect lovers. No arguments, no fighting, no divorce, they're always eager to make you happy. In the end, the last two human survivors will be an old homeless man and old homeless woman who will find and repair salvaged parts for their own sex robots, and humanity will be dust. Eliot was not referring to any particular event or cause, but to the state of mankind's morality and strenuosity. His lines about the hollow men and the stuffed men, heads filled with straw, refer to the degeneration of the human race into a species devoid of moral strength, devoid of hope or creativity, hollow men. To Eliot, the species would end when it became so lackadaisical that it lacked even the will to live beyond the life of a farm animal, self-subjugating and Dionysian. This is echoed by Nietzsche's description of the herd as opposed to the Übermensch, the weak and lazy who lack ambition and are resigned to mediocrity, taught that striving for greatness is a sin and that all men should be equal in weakness so as not to offend the meek. This can be recognized in mass entertainment and mass submission to cultural norms, days spent watching television, going to a hated job and living in a loveless relationship because it's expected of them. This is Eliot's whimper. I see most of the likely guesses already. Decent chance that we'll make our planet uninhabitable in the next 100 years or so, but there's another possibility. Most of our societies are evolving in a deeply unhealthy way. We're not interacting physically with members of our communities and establishing connections to the people who share our cities and towns with us. In the hierarchy of needs, social connection is not high, but it is there, and you can already see the effects of it not being met. I think that even if we dodge all the other bullets, we'll raise enough subsequent generations of children that feel no attachment to other humans that we'll just lose our will to continue. I already see young people today who will never know the joy of a neighborhood pickup game of baseball or going to their pub to socialize or just hanging out with friends. All of their social gratification comes from talking to people online who are much more like them. There is less effort required to understand someone who likes all the same games, music, and art that you do than there is to some kid on your track team, so they take the path of least resistance and a lot gets lost in that process. This is not some cranky old man complaining about the next generation. I don't see them as entitled or lazy. I see them as the victims. Probably one of the various indirect symptoms of global warming and deforestation. I suspect that the water levels and rising temperatures and increase in variability of weather and storms won't be the thing that does it. There will likely be people with plenty of resources at their disposal who can relocate to newly usable areas, build shelters with sustainable power generation and engineer farms and whatnot to keep a sizable population alive. More likely,
it would come from something like a virus way worse than COVID, which are more and more likely as we destroy diversity in the animal kingdom, or as they go extinct due to climate. Outside of that, there's always the unknown factor of supervolcano eruptions or an undetected or undeterrable asteroid strike that would speed up the process. I also suspect that well before any genuine threat of total extinction for the whole species, we'd be dealing with a whole lot of people without resources and means to survive being the first victims. The gap of time between most of the world dying and all of the world dying could be a very long period of time. Societal collapse will have a slow start when mass migrations to the northern hemisphere begin as climate change, man-made or otherwise, makes growing crops in the equatorial regions of the Earth impossible. Hundreds of millions will flood into Spain, Italy, Eastern Europe, Russia, and the US. This coupled with worldwide droughts will cause massive water shortage. Millions will die of dehydration in refugee camps. Smaller countries with fewer resources will totally collapse into anarchy as gangs fight to control resources and profit from the chaos. Larger nations will invade the abandoned territories to extract water with little regard to anyone who decided to stay. This will buy time, but the first domino in the human extinction timeline has already fallen. By this point the global economy has all but collapsed. Modern supply chains are almost entirely eliminated in favor of producing as much food as possible. Luxuries such as new clothes, cars, technology, are limited to the ultra-wealthy and any resemblance of a middle class is gone. Disease starts to spread as a large portion of the habitable world sees population density skyrocket. Different groups will blame each other, resulting in war and genocide. Society will further retreat into the remaining cities as authorities won't be able to maintain civility in suburban areas. Those cities will be the final beacons of humanity, until they fall due to lack of resources, mass conflict, uncontrollable diseases, or natural disasters. Then humanity will live its final days as we lived some of our earliest, in the caves and ruins of our former glory. Maybe a few thousand lucky ones will get to see some great planet-killing type event that society no longer would be capable of preventing. Here are two that aren't talked about but are imminent, as in, will happen in my lifetime unless immediate drastic action is taken. 1. Antibiotic resistance. Imagine one day you wake up and antibiotics have just stopped working. The ability to treat and cure bacterial and fungal infections will be set back by 200+ years. Diseases like cholera, syphilis, tuberculosis, anthrax, E. coli, Yersinia pestis, aka bubonic fucking plague, etc. would all come back in a massive way. We would have pandemic like this one we've been in almost constantly for diseases more deadly by orders of magnitude. Basic surgeries would become almost impossible. And all of this due to our over-reliance on the current antibiotics, and our corporate overlords refuse to put money into researching new ones. Fun stuff. 2. We are running out of topsoil. We are running out of topsoil. You know, the thing we use to produce 95% of the planet's food. In 2012 a professor at the University of Sydney estimated that 40% of arable soil is degraded and that we only have about 60 years of pristine, arable soil left. 60 years left. Besides for growing food, topsoil is essential for the planet to filter fresh water and absorb carbon. Plus the food we would be able to grow would be incredibly diminished in nutrients. I don't think why not being able to grow food for, by 2070 ish, 10 billion people would be a problem. Everyone is saying humans, but I disagree. I'm not saying we're the most intelligent beings. We do have wars, prejudice, poor judgment, self-destructive tendencies, the whole nine. But, we're also intelligent enough to terraform an entire planet, i.e. Mars. If we go extinct, I think it'll be from an astronomical event we simply don't have the time to prepare for. Literally us against the universe's clock. Think our sun dying. Beyond that, humanity will find a way. I honestly think what we're living through right now, Technological breakthrough and internet, here on Earth is the beginning of the human species, not anything close to the end. Edit, see my comment below. I link to another comment in this thread. In summary, I referenced terraforming Mars to highlight our potential, not to emphasize an escape route for humankind. Our next big obstacle is stabilizing our environment and understanding how we can minimize our footprint here on Earth. If we're unable to sustain life here on Earth, we certainly will not ever be able to become an interplanetary species. Thousands of years from now this will be geoengineering 101. Climate change will most definitely by itself bring civilization to the brink of collapse, but I think its real danger will be as a catalyst for the next major conflict. Mass migration on a level never before seen, bringing with it increasingly deadly diseases and overwhelmed services, plus mass shortages of everything, including fuel, water, and food, due to famines that will see entire countries starve, will push nations to the brink, and those who are able to take what they need will. As nations turn inward to protect their own, collapsing networks of alliance set the stage for the tinderbox to go up. There's a reason the US military views climate change as a national security issue and an existential threat. This comes at a time when a major power, China, is rising to challenge the hegemon, the US. The tensions between the rising power and the dominant power throughout recorded history has more often than not led to conflict, even without the compounding factor of the existential threat climate change poses. It's the Thucydides trap, in 12 of 16 past cases in which a rising power has confronted a ruling power, the result has been bloodshed. This time, the compounding factor of climate change makes the unlikely possibility of a peaceful solution even more remote. Sorry to be a downer on a Monday morning, but the way things stand now, this likely doesn't end well. Even if things miraculously change for the better and we see global mobilization to combat climate change, we're still in for some extremely tough times ahead. People in these end times seem obsessed with extinction and black swan events that we may or may not be barreling towards. But this is a wrong method of thinking about the collapse, because it's not that simple. We already have had a meaningful decline in lifespan between the boomers and Gen X, which may or may not have a direct impact on how you should plan for the future. You reading this post right now are unlikely to make it much further past 60, and you are also less likely to be able to procreate. As you become part of a growing aging population, your quality of life will begin to rapidly decrease as those young people who created the civil conditions for the elderly to live how they have become less numerous. Your children, if you have any, will have a similar reduction in lifespan, both from the climate and the collapse of global supply chains. Climate change will cause apocalyptic events within our lifetimes, and most of the people in this topic will not be able to survive. Will humanity become extinct? Probably not, but this level of civilization is unlikely to ever come about ever again, even if the Earth does not become completely unlivable. And yes, that is the point we are at. Earth may become as livable as Venus after the collapse of human civilization. I honestly don't think we'll go extinct anytime soon. We've survived some insane shit. And even if %99 of us are wiped out by whatever, that still leaves millions of people. And as soon as we're technologically able to begin inhabiting other worlds, our chances of extinction become even less. Though it is arguable if our current species will survive. We're going to evolve into our next stage, and if we begin habitating other worlds, those humans will evolve to adapt to the new world. People like to spell doom and gloom, but the reality is that even with climate change, people will survive. It may only be the rich that can afford the accommodations that enable them to survive, and unless climate change goes completely insane, like our entire planet suddenly becoming 100 degrees hotter overnight, then people will survive and adapt. Will a lot of people die? Yeah. A lot will die. And those that survive will pass their genes on, and will adapt. I can easily see some form of humanity surviving billions of years. We're so intelligent it's kinda scary honestly. I like to try to view humanity from an outside perspective sometimes, and we are scary and we are able to survive some insanely horrible things.